Hi everyone. Well, hey, I got my dirty shirt on and my hands are getting a little greasy, and you know what? I thought, I need to record this. It's a maintenance day. I wanted to show you guys some of the things that I keep track of, and maybe it can help you out. So come along and let's get started. All right, so we are currently in St. George. If you've been following us on our little trip wizard thing, this was one of our stops because our daughter graduated this last week. And since I'm here, I'm parked at my sister's house, and we're parked out on the street, which is nice and hard pavement. So when you have a 10-ton rig, it's nice to have a really solid surface so that you can lift it up to get to the tires and things like that. So I've actually rotated the tires on my tag axle. My tag axle is an extra axle on the back. I have duals, and then I have a tag, and I'm supposed to swap those tires around on the tags. I've done that. I've also packed the bearings on the tag axle, and I'm going to do that on the front axles now. Now my duals, the tires don't get rotated at all, so they stay the same, so nothing really extra to do there. And the duals are set up a little different than these other two axles. So the tag axle and the front axle are on spindles, so they have bearings that you have to pull out and you have to clean and pack them with new grease. And typically that happens about every 10,000 miles on this rig. And it really you have to really look at your owner's manual to see what you are supposed to do for your rig. Okay, for example, my duals, my rear end, for my duals and everything, that's every 100,000 miles because that is a floating rear end. It's got oil that's in the rear end portion of itself, the drive portion, and that oil goes out to the bearings that are in the wheels, and you take care of that every 100,000 miles. Our rig has just over 60,000 on it right now, and the last time I did this job was when it was at 50, so it's time to do it again. So I just did the tag axles. They're all done. I got those wheels swapped. I'm going to do that on the front, and the front's a little harder. So in my tag axle case, it's just drum brakes, and it's pretty simple. And so what I'm going to show you on how to do the front brakes here, or the front wheels, is basically the same thing that you do on the back, except that you don't have the calipers and rotors to deal with like you do on the front. So my tag axle has drum brakes, and then the rest of the brakes on my rig are all disc brakes. So they're done a little differently. I've ordered the discs themselves, which is called Rotors. Okay, that little thing that squeezes the brake pads is called the caliper, and I've ordered new brake pads to go with the new Rotors, even though I replaced those brake pads, like, I don't know, a year or two ago. They probably need to be replaced anyway, but the fact that I'm going to actually replace the Rotors, which I did not do the last time because I didn't know how, and I have now learned how to do that. So I'm going to go ahead and replace them. I did caliper them out, and I checked them, and they were still within spec. But now that I'm going to redo everything, I want to put everything brand new except for the calipers. Yeah, calipers. I always get that mixed up. But the calipers, I'm going to leave the same. We're going to double check them, and if they're working and they're not leaking, then we'll keep those on there. We're not going to change anything. But anyway, so I'll go through all that, and I'm going to share that with you so that you guys can see what's going on. So again, this is Tigner Adventures, and this is another one of our adventures that we're going to have. So my name is David, my wife Ninette, and our little cat Tansy. We live full-time in our rig, and so we have to do a lot of these things ourselves, because if you try to take it into a shop, they want you to leave it, and we live in it. So it's really tough to leave this sitting somewhere for weeks. Most of even the shop here in St. George, I was talking to the guy, he says they're 8 weeks out. So there's no way that we could park our rig and leave it at their lot for 8 weeks waiting for them to get around to doing anything on it. So in that case, we end up doing a lot of things ourselves. So okay, so with that said, hopefully you'll subscribe to our channel, and if you're one of our returning subscribers, wow, thank you, welcome back. Thanks for the support, we really appreciate it. And then also make sure you ring that bell to get notified of anything new that we have. So I'm going to go ahead and show you now what we're doing. All right, and then how we get started here, and your rig could be a little different. This is a Ford, okay, F53. So what they do is when they're building motorhomes, they order some frame from a manufacturer. Okay, in this case, they ordered a Ford F53, which is all it was a stripped down frame, and this is a 1994. So it's just the frame. Then they built the motorhome on top of the frame. So when I go to the store to get parts and things, I always tell them it's a Ford F53. It's a 1994 Ford F53. And then this one happens to have a 460 engine in it. You may have a Chevy engine, you may have Freightliner, you may have, I mean, there's all kinds of different manufacturers out there that make motorhome chassis for the motorhome to be put on there. And you need to look in your manual and look to see which one is yours is set up as, so that you can get the right parts. All right, so this is my front wheel, and I'm using my iPhone to do the taping. I have a GoPro that I've used from time to time, but it's kind of a hassle and I really don't see what's going on. So I like my camera because I can kind of see what's going on. So my head's going to be cut off, but you don't care about that because I'm going to be showing you this. Everybody has these false little hubcaps on there, and you got to figure out how to get them off. Okay, now mine has 2 bolts that actually hold it on there. So if I take these pliers and I actually tap on here, pretty solid, I mean pretty hollow sounding, right? Mine are actually lined up with my valve stem. If I tap on this one, see the difference? So I know that this is a solid one, and there's actually 2 of these holding on there. So if I use these little slip joint pliers and grab this, I can actually tip this and it comes off, and I can free up these, take these little dummy caps off there, so I can free up these bolts that have to come off, or the nuts there. So I'm going to use this little tool. This is a rigid little, I don't even know what they call these things, but ratcheting type drill thing, you know, that hammer drill kind of thing. And I'm going to use this when I'm working on this because it just makes the job a little faster. So in my particular case, I'm using a 1 1/16 socket. I actually had to go buy this. Okay, there's nothing that is typically on a car that is this large. Okay, so anytime you get into the large stuff, you got to go buy individual pieces to work on stuff. So I'm going to take these off, and this has got pretty good torque on it, so it'll take that off pretty good. And then let's see, I think I'm going to undo a little bit. And now my false hubcap comes off. Okay, so I'm going to set that over here to the side, out of the way, and I'm going to put my little goodies and things in there to kind of keep track of them. And then I've got to take these off. So these are little dummy things that sit, oh, there went that one, but it sits on the lug nut, and that's what the hubcap actually bolts to. So I'm going to undo that. And they're only torqued on there at 40 pounds. So, you know, they're not on there very tight, but they're tight enough they don't fall off. But these little buggers, these this is a 1/2-inch stud. These guys are torqued on here at 150. So you have to use a breaker bar. So I've got, and this particular one is a 7/8 socket, and I have to use a breaker bar before I jack my rig up to actually break these loose. So I want to get them loose. I actually break it, and then I come back and I keep them snug, but I got to break it before I actually take the weight off the tire. Otherwise, if it's just hanging there, then there's nothing stopping it from turning, and I can't get it. I mean, it takes a lot of force to pull that apart, and also to torque those back at 150 when I'm ready. So the first step I'm going to do then is I'm just going to breaker that, and let me grab that, and I'll be right back and show you how that actually works. So this is a breaker bar. I've put my socket on here, and this gives me the leverage to actually pull it. If I actually do it with a ratcheting wrench, then in the past I have pulled so hard on the ratcheting wrench that I've broke the ratcheting wrench. So that's why they have these breaker bars, okay? And if you had a really tight something, you can put an extension on this. They call that a cheater, and give you a little bit more torque to actually do it. Now this is only 150 pounds, so it's not that hard, but So basically I'm going to just put this on here, and I'm going to put some effort into this to get this broke. Alright, so this is loose. I'm going to come back down and just kind of snug it up a little bit, and I'm going to just keep doing that on all of the nuts, and there are 10 of them on this one. So I am ready to jack up the rig, and I mentioned that, so this is 17,000 pounds, 18,000, so we're about 9 ton, okay? Now each wheel does not hold 9 ton. So I've got a 12 ton jack, however, that's a real low profile, so when I crawl under here, I've kind of got it set in place to start jacking this up. I'll show you why I use that. And I bought that from Harbor Freight, so it didn't cost a lot, and it works really nice because it's a low profile. It's only this high, but then it don't necessarily jack up that high either. It only goes up so high. But one of the things is, when you're jacking up a rig, no matter whether it's a 9 ton rig or, you know, a couple thousand-pound car, you should always back it up with some jack stands. Okay, now I have some ones here that I bought from Harbor Freight. Just because they are inexpensive, but these are rated, these are aluminum, and they're rated 3 ton. And not any one wheel on my rig is carrying 3 ton. So I can easily put these, you know, put up one side or the other with 2 of these, which is 6 ton, and, you know, do whatever work I have to do. So what I'm going to, you know, do is I usually jack up one side, put one of the jack stands under it, and then I go to the other side and jack it up, put jack stands under it, and then it's completely solid and it's not going to move. And also, you know, the jack's hydraulic, so they just tend to always drop. All right, they don't stay at that pressure or that thing, and they'll just slowly just start going down. And so that's why you have jack stands, to stop it from going anywhere, and that just is a nice safety effort. So anyway, so in this particular case though, if you look under here on the rig, you can see that this jack stand is sticking up quite a bit further than what the frame, my actual axle going across there for this drive for my front axle here. So I got it jacked up a long ways, which I don't need to, and so I'm going to actually stack up a bunch of 2x6s and 8s right here to actually, that's what I'm going to actually set it on, because this is such a low front end on this motorhome. So if you look over here, I've got this little low jack. This is only about maybe 8 inches here. So, and I have started jacking it up to get some stuff on there. So I've got this on there. I've jacked it up to get this wheel to spin right here. So the wheel is free. No sense boring you with all the stuff of doing that. So anyway, I am to the point now where I've got to take these, I'm going to take these big boards and I'm going to stack under here, and I'm going to jack it up until I can actually let the jack down, and it'll sit onto all this solid lumber. That way it'll be nice and solid while I do the other side, because remember, I'm going to rotate the tires, so I have to lift both sides up. And so I'm going to do that, and I'm going to show you the little challenge that I have on mine on the driver's side, because I have a door over there and a nice little step, but that's in the way of getting that tire off. So we're going to look at that just a little bit too. But this, again, this is a Ford F53, okay, and that's how this one's done. If you have Freightliner or Chevy or who knows what, then yours might be a little bit different. Alright, so we are jacking this up, and it's nice to have some of these different size pieces of lumber from my sister's wood pile. So that's handy. So that slides under there. I'm actually using a shorter one here than these nice long ones, because I have a stabilizer piece behind there, and I don't want to be putting pressure on my steering line, my driver's line itself. And so now we got that up there, which our wheel is quite a ways off the ground, and now we've got it right here. So at this point we can go ahead and lower it down onto here, and we should be in pretty good shape. And one thing I want to point out is I'm going to release the jack to lower that down. I actually want to release that rather slowly, so it just slowly puts the pressure on there instead of having it just drop on there. So that wood was complaining just a little bit. That's a heavy little girl. So, and at this point, pull our jack out of there. So you can see on this side we're missing that back there, but we are completely sitting on here now, and our wheel is free. So we're ready to do this on the other side also. Okay, so this is my driver's side, and you'll notice that I have a step here because I happen to have a door on my rig. And so I've got a step here, and the issue I run into is when I have to raise this wheel up high enough to get it off the axle, but then the axle is so high that I can't get the wheel out from between here and the axle. And so that's a little bit of a challenge. And so one way I get around it, at least hopefully that's going to work, is I've put my jack down and I've raised the actual motorhome up a little bit, so it's actually lifted this up, and then I will jack this up enough to take the pressure off the tire, take the tire loose, and then lower the axle down so I can tip it out of there. So that is the plan, and then we'll have this one free. So I'm going to do the same thing I did on the other side. You know, I've got the different ones here. I've got to find my, there's my solid one. So I've got to pull these off right here, take this hub off, untorque these, and get them loose enough that I can get it undone once I get it jacked up. But I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then we will be ready to actually get that tire off. Okay, I've got the wheel loose, and now we just have to get it off of here. So, you'll notice that axle back there is just in the wrong place for letting this tire out of here. So what I'm going to do is, I've got it jacked up high enough, but I'm going to lower the jack all the way down to the bottom of the jack. So hopefully that drops that axle down far enough this can slide out of there. So you can see that I've got the jack, it's jacked up. I've got these blocks sitting here right now. I'm going to take a couple of them out. They were there just for safety. And now the blocks are to the height of the jack, and I'm going to go ahead and lower the pressure on the jack so it slowly comes down. Worst case, if it falls, it'll just land on these blocks right here. So just a little safety thing, and of course you want to be out of the way so that you don't get hurt if it does fall. Alright, you can see that we've got the wheel off. Had to lower that down almost as low as the jack would go, and then it actually stopped because the leaf spring was actually holding it, and so then it was completely on the jack from the motorhome. But that wasn't quite far enough, so then I turned the wheel all the way to the right, which is a good move, except by the time I got out of the rig back down here, since both wheels are off the ground, it would always go back to the straight, so which is interesting. So based on the way that everything's set up, it just pulls it back to being straight. And so I finally got Ninette to turn it all the way to the right, and then I was able to slide the tire out from between this step and this axle, this part of the axle there. So anyway, it's out, and we can now rotate the tires pretty easy. But the next step we're going to actually do is we're going to undo this axle, and we're going to pull the axle to replace this rotor back here and the brake pads that are on there, which still look pretty new, but we'll look at them a little closer once we get them off. But because we're replacing the rotor, we're going to replace the pads at the same time. That's kind of the normal what happens. So Anyway, before I can do that, we're going to show you how to get the calipers off. They are a little bit of a trick on this. There's no bolt holding them on, so you just got to realize that there's a pin there that you got to remove, and then they just come off. Anyway, that's our next step. So this wheel's off. We can go take the other side off, and both wheels will now be off, and we're ready to pull the axles. So I will get things set up, and then I'll show you how we're going to get those calipers off. Nice little trick. It's best if you have 3 hands. Just a little hint there. This is the key to getting these calipers off. So this is a pin. You probably really can't tell right now, so I'll have to show you once I get it off. But there's little lips on there, and they keep it from pounding out. So what we're going to do is we're going to knock it back out, and it goes the whole length of this caliper. It comes out this other side. So the issue is, what I was saying, you need 3 hands, is because you got to squeeze that to get that lip close, or get it past that lip. It just takes a lot of little encouraging words, if you know what I mean, and almost some luck. They may have a tool that does this, but if Ford does, they are sure tight-lipped about it, and they don't want anybody knowing how to do anything that they would rather have you come and pay for. So, well, didn't quite get it far enough. So anyway, that's what we're doing here, and we will continue until we get that started, and then I'll show you what it looks like, and we will be successful. So, I know I made that look easy, but this is my 3rd time doing it, so maybe it is getting easier, but we are just knocking that out. And let me see if I can slide the camera over here. Let's see, right here. No, you can see that pin as I start hammering it out, coming out on that side. Unfortunately, my punch gets stuck in the between there, but you can see that just coming out. Now, the bad thing is there's one on the bottom too. So that's almost all the way out, and so I'm going to leave that right now, and I'm going to work on the bottom one, and then I will come back and we'll pull it out, and then I'll show you how you get the caliper off. Alright, so it ended up, the pin is down here. It ended up that I needed to take this stopper out, and then I was able to squeeze that and actually just be able to hit it straight with the hammer, and now it's started. So I'm actually going to knock it out the other end, opposite of the one above. So I'm going to go ahead and get those out, and then I'll show you what they actually look like. Alright, so I've got the pen out, and you'll notice that it's 2 pieces of metal with a piece of rubber running through the middle of them. And all you're doing is you're squeezing that together so that this little lip right here that's stopped up against the metal, it can slide past that, and then you just push it all the way through. Piece of cake if you can get it squeezed and hit and everything at once. The bottom was actually easier than the top one, and so now both of them are out, and we've got our caliper on here. So now we're going to go ahead and pull it off. Alright, I think this is the best view I can get. But this whole unit right here is the caliper, and it gets stuck in there. This one actually wiggles a little bit. A lot of times they won't even wiggle at all. So, And basically, I'm just going to kind of tap right on these edges here on the top and the bottom. And we're just going to get this out of here. Now, I want to support it because I don't want it falling down on the brake line when it comes out. So, but what happens is this slides in here, but it does get stuck a little bit. And then when we clean it all up and put it back, it'll go in really easy, but you know, from all the grime and from the road and everything, it gets it where it doesn't want to move very easily. So we just kind of keep working it back and forth until we get it out. All right, so that came off, and the real issue here is this rotor has such a lip here that's been worn down from the brakes that it was actually catching on that lip. So because I was replacing the brakes too, I wasn't too worried about it, but this is what it did to the brakes, because it just broke them off because they were down in this nice little groove here. So another good reason to replace the brake pads at the same time. So these have a specific spec that they have to be so wide, and then the brakes push on them. And plus, if they get too thin, then they also overheat a lot. And so this one's right at the end of its life, and so that's why we wanted to replace it at the same time we're doing the bearings. But if you notice, I've pulled that off now, and it's just, this caliper is just sitting up here on top. It's almost fully compressed, so you know, the brake pads really aren't too bad. They've actually held up really well. But we're going to go ahead and replace them anyway, and so we'll have new pads and everything on. Alright, so I have removed the caliper from this side. It's sitting back behind the wheel also. And we are currently on the passenger side of the vehicle now. And so now I'm going to go ahead and pull this hub off of the axle. That's a spindle that it's actually running around on. So I'm going to use some slip joint pliers, and this middle piece right here, this is just a grease cover. Okay, and so I'm just going to grab that and kind of wiggle it back and forth. It just presses in there, and there it comes off. Okay, so exposing our actual nut in there. So that's our first step. Set that to the side. If you look in here, there is a cotter pin there, so we got to take that cotter pin off, and then there's a little lock mechanism there. I'll show you when I pull that out of there. So we take that off with our slip pliers. We just kind of bend that cotter pin around until we can get that out of there. Why we replace the cotter pins once they've been used is because that one just broke off, and this one might do the same, which actually makes the job a little easier. Yep, broke that one off, and we'll just lift the cotter pin out. So that's out of there, and then the little retainer that I was talking about, what it is it fits on the end of the nut that's holding this on. And this cotter pin goes in there and it holds that, so the nut can't come undone without removing that. Alright, so our next step is to go ahead and undo the nut. Now, let me just explain how this works. There's a nut, a washer, and then the outer bearing. And so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take that nut off, and the washer, set it to the side, and then I'm going to pull the hub out a little bit and then kind of push the hub back to get the bearing loose. And then I'm going to take the bearing and set it out here, and then I'm going to put the washer and nut back on. Okay, that will allow me to pull the hub, kind of jerk it as I pull it off. It'll hit the seal back there, and it will hit that seal, and it will pop that seal out, and then we'll be able to get to the rear bearing. So we're going to take off the nut first. Go. And I'll tell you, when we put this back on, I'll tell you how you torque it and how you tighten it up and everything. Now this happens to be disc brakes, but this mechanism is done the same way when you're dealing with drum brakes, all right? The difference is you don't have a caliper. That's really all the difference is. So, all right, so that's kind of stuck on there with the grease. So I'm gonna move it out a little bit, so just be patient as I kind of get in here and do this. Whoop, there comes the bearing. So you wanna hold this up. You don't wanna put the pressure on the back bearing. Okay, so I'm putting that little washer back on, putting the nut on. All right, and then we're gonna go ahead and just pull this out of here. Oh, there we go. It's out. You'll see the part that's left here is our actual rear bearing. So this is our front bearing right here, a lot smaller. That's what we call the outer bearing. And then this was the nut and flat washer. We're going to clean all this stuff off, so we want to get them as clean and all the dirt and stuff off them as we can. This is the bearing, so you'll notice that this one is a lot larger. This is our inner bearing, this is our outer bearing, and that's how they ride within the actual hub. And I'll show you what they ride on here in just a second. And this is our seal. So it's a rubber seal that goes around this spindle so grease doesn't get out and get all over the brakes. Alright, so this is the back of the hub here, and down inside here is what they call a cup or a race, okay? And the bearing is made up of all these little round things that turn inside here, and it sits in there in that little cup or cone, and it just rotates back and forth. And so what we're going to do, we're going to clean all the grease out of this whole mechanism, and then we're going to repack these with nice clean fresh grease. So the first thing is to get the grease out. So that's our first step. And to start with, I'm just going to take a rag and I'm going to wipe all the excess grease out the best that I can, and then I've got some spray I'll use to get it a little bit cleaner. Okay, so the idea of all this excess grease in here is that if this bearing starts getting dry, it starts getting, heating up a little bit, then hopefully some of this grease will just kind of flow back in there and protect the bearing. Also, when it's driving, the centrifugal force is throwing the grease everywhere. It kind of keeps the grease on the bearings instead of letting it all ooze out of the bearing itself. But that's quite a bit of grease that we've pulled out of there, and we're going to put a bunch of that back in there. Most of that grease looks pretty clean, but this black stuff is what it ends up looking like, and that's just a little wear on the metal over time. So I packed these bearings last time, so the grease I'm using is the same grease I'm going to use this time. And a big note to make here is that there's different types of grease. So if you're doing this for the first time, you don't really know what's in there. You want to make sure you get this cleaned out really, really good and all sprayed out and all the excess grease off, so that whatever base grease you use now won't be incompatible with whatever was in there before. In my case, I'm using the same stuff, and so I don't have to get it sparkling clean like you would otherwise. So I'm going to wipe out all the excess, and then I'm going to put new grease in there when we get ready to actually do our stuff. But I'm just going to use a rag and just finish wiping the rest of this stuff out, and then we will clean the bearings in there. So I've got the bearings here, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to spray them with some of this brake parts cleaner. You can pick this up at AutoZone, Napa, O'Reilly. It's just standard stuff. CRC, AutoZone, O'Reilly, I know AutoZone. O'Reilly probably has their own brand also. It's basically all the same stuff. All I'm going to do is I'm going to spray some of this on this bearing, and I'm going to start moving it around as I spray. So what I'm looking at here is inside here, remember these little round pieces, this is the bearing that's running around here, and it's running around on this inner portion of the bearing. And if you look inside here, there's a gap between each one of these. And you're trying to get all the grease out of here and all the grease that's in between here out of around here. So that's what you're trying to clean off. So using this stuff with the little spray pointer here, you know, I can stick that down in there and I can kind of blow. So I'm blowing it into the garbage can. It's trying to clean that off and get all that grease out of there. And so all I'm going to do is I'm just going to keep doing that same thing until I get this bearing cleaned, and then I'll show you what that looks like. This bearing is all nice and clean now, and this spray is, what it does is that it sprays it in there. It's dries really quick. So the thing you don't want to do is you don't want to spray all this in there and then use a air gun to spray here, which starts spinning this bearing real quick, because it will actually damage the bearing. So, but if I was to, I don't know if you can see in here, if I turn this just right, I can see all the way through these and I don't see anything in there. And worst case is when I go to pack grease in there, it's going to squeeze in between each one of those areas, and if there is anything left over, it'll squeeze it out. So, and again, I'm using the same grease, so it's not too major of an issue for me at this point. But here's my next bearing. I'm going to do the same identical thing here. So I'm going to start by wiping it all off, and then we'll go ahead and clean it. Alright, so the bearing is nice and clean, and what I want to do is I've also wiped out the race that this is going to be on. That's that cone or cup or whatever. And this sits in there this direction, and I want to sit that in there, and using my two fingers, I'm going to actually rotate that back and forth. And as I rotate that back and forth, I want to feel it nice and smooth, okay? That way I know that that cone is still good and the bearing's good. I had one on my tag axle that I had a growling noise, so I knew the bearing was bad, and I cleaned them and they looked good. But when I put them in there and did that little test, then I realized it had little scrapes all over the bearings. So if that does happen, it's very easy to replace this. If you look here, there's a lip right here. And that little lip is the actual cone, all right? So let me flip this over and I'll show you the inside, the back side of that. All right, this is looking inside of the hub, and if you look down here, you see this little ledge right here. And that is the back side of the cone. And that cone is put in there, you slide it all the way in, and it hits against the actual hub itself. And what you do to take it out is you just take a flat head screwdriver or some kind of a punch that's flat, and you just go around back and forth there until it pushes that all the way out the back side, okay, or front side, however you want to look at it. Then to put it back in, you set the other one back on there, and you turn this old one around and set on top of it, and then you just kind of tap all the way around until you tap it all the way back in, and that's how you put the cone, or also called a race, back into there. And so either one of these races, this one here or the one that's in the front there, is very easy to replace, and that's what the bearings ride against. It used to be that when you bought a bearing, they came as a set, but the last time I replaced them, I was able to find the part at Napa. They were individual. Bearing and cone were separate, and so I checked at AutoZone and O'Reilly. They sell them exactly the same way, so they aren't sold as a pair anymore, but you buy the piece you need. In my case, I replaced the race and the bearing. I want to one to have 2 new pieces put in there. But that's how easy it is to fix if you have a problem. In our case, we don't. Alright, so our next step now is, you'll notice that down in there we have all these little bolts that are actually bolting this rotor to the actual hub. And the value of that is that you can replace the rotor without having to replace the whole hub. So we've got to pull all those bolts out. It does use a special socket. So I'll grab that socket and we'll tell you which one it is for this, but you may have a different one for yours. So you'll notice here I've taken the hub and I've put this back. It's just sitting on the tire. And that's just to give us some, we got to pull those off. So it's just giving us a holding thing there so that the thing don't spin around on the concrete sidewalk. Now, those little bolts inside, they use this type of a connector, and this is called a Torque Plus, and this is an EP18 is what that size is. Now, they come as a complete set. Unfortunately, I couldn't just buy one, and the only one that actually had these was O'Reilly. Ford doesn't sell any tools, so they weren't much help at all, but O'Reilly happened to have these, AutoZone did not, and so that was a plus. And they work really nice, but it is an extra expense, so extra part tool. So I'm going to go ahead and just break these. They're only torqued on here at like 80 to 90 foot-pounds, so they're not too tough to get off. And so we're just going to take those off. Well, that's what it said to torque them on there as, but that's definitely more than 90 foot-pounds. There's one. Two. Maybe that's 90. Maybe I'm getting weak. Whew. All right, well, we broke those loose, so I'm going to use that little ratchet thing to unscrew those the rest of the way, and then we'll pull that rotor off. All right, now that's off. It's just this rotor now, so I've got to take this off. So I'm going to use a rubber mallet here, and I'm just going to kind of knock it along there, and it'll just kind of pop off. There it goes. And there we are. That was the rotor, and we now have it free from the hub, ready to put on a brand new one. All right, here's our new rotor. So we're going to take this plastic all off that it was sealed in, and we're going to go ahead and set it onto the hub and line up our holes. So it actually sits on there pretty easily. I've had some that you are a little stickier getting them on there, but you just start the bolts and you just put them on, and you just keep tightening them up a little bit on each one until you get them all tight. So we're going to go ahead. I've actually gone through and I've cleaned off all the old Loctite on each one of the bolts here, and I'm going to use some new Loctite. I'm actually using blue, which is meant to stop it from vibrating loose, but it also, you can still get it off later a lot easier, so you don't have to, the red is more like permanent almost. So anyway, we'll see how that works. Alright, so I have screwed those in, I just snugged them up, and I'm actually ready to start torquing those down. And I'm just going to do a crisscross pattern and torque them to what the specs are for this particular rotor. So I've got those all basically thumb tight, And so now I'm going to torque them down, and according to the book it's actually 74 to 89 foot-pounds. So I've set my torque wrench to be 84, so just under the max, and I'm going to go around, and I'm supposed to go in a crisscross manner tightening these down so that they all end up being the same when I'm done, but not putting any more torque on one side than the other kind of thing. Alright, so I've gone back and forth crisscross, they're all torqued. Now I'm going to go all the way around just to make sure I didn't miss one. There's 10, so I'm going to count. So this is 2, alright, those are all torqued on there. So our next step now is to actually put the bearing in and then put the seal back on. So our rotor is on, all bolted on, torqued in. The next thing is to deal with the bearings. So we've got to pack these bearings. Now before I start, I did want to just show you that in the same way as with the race, on the back of the race there's a number in case you have to replace it. On the back of this bearing, it also has a number of what the bearing is. So you can always, my rig is a 1994 rig, and so a lot of times they don't necessarily have those parts, and so sometimes AutoZone or O'Reilly doesn't cross match correctly. So if you just take this number into them, they can give you back the exact bearing that you've taken out. So that's a nice feature of these numbers. Now I got to pack the grease in between each one of these little bearing rollers, and to do that you want to start off with a clean hand or clean gloves. You want to use gloves, and I'm just going to take some grease here and I'm going to put it in my hand. Alright, now this grease is, in this case, is from Napa, and it's a wheel bearing and chassis grease. So it's pretty good quality. It's Napa, you know, it's their name brand, but it's been a good grease. It's worked very well. Alright, so I'm going to put the grease in my hand like that, and then I'm going to cup my hand, and I'm going to actually try to force the grease down into these little holes here, and I'll show you as I'm doing that. So what I'm doing is I'm pushing the grease into this little opening here, and I'm looking for it to come out this hole right here. So if you look closely as I'm doing this, you'll see it do that. Alright, so here it comes. You can kind of see it oozing up out of there. So see how that's oozing right there? And I'm just going to turn the bearing a little bit, and I'm going to keep working all the way around until I see that on every one of those little spindle spots. So you can see that just coming up through there, and that is why they call it packing the bearing. It's not hard. If you don't like grease on you, then maybe it's hard, I don't know. But just using your hand. They do have a mechanism for making this more automatic, and if you take it into a shop, they don't do it this way, but I don't want to spend the money for the piece. And they've been doing this since way before I was ever born. My dad showed me how he used to do this when he was a kid, and that's how they pack the bearings. So now that I'm all the way done, I'm just going the rest of the way around just to make sure that I didn't lose any, or miss a spot. I want to make sure that it's popping out of all those different little spots. When that's done, then I'm just going to kind of put a coat of grease around, just kind of smear it around here, all this excess. And then I'm going to set this into that race. Now, this is the back bearing, so I'm actually going to put a little bit extra grease around the back part of this. This is actually between here and the seal that we're going to put in. So I'm just getting some extra in there, just in case. You know, it doesn't hurt anything, and it may help also. But when I get done getting all this grease out of here, I want to kind of get this center dried out of here, or cleaned up the best I can, which I have. And I'm just going to set it into this race. And there we go. It's all set in there. I'm going to go ahead and wipe off any excess right here and just kind of put it around here on the bearing. Now, you can't get too much, so I shouldn't say, more is better, because sometimes that's not always the case. But in this case, we're good. I'm just going to go ahead and clean my hands, and then I'm going to wipe around where the seal is supposed to go right here. So I'm just going to kind of clean that up. And again, one of the main things here is I want to make sure I don't get any dirt in this. All right, so that's a real key. You want to make sure you don't get dirt in your bearings, because then that makes them wear out a lot faster. All right, so that's done. And what I'm going to do now is, I kind of mentioned this before, that there's this seal. So here's the seal. It's all rubber right here, and that slides over the back of the spindle, and then it keeps the grease from leaking out of here out onto your brakes and things like that. So if you notice, this one happens to have a lip on it, so it only goes on one way. And again, if you look close enough, you can see a number on here, but if you need to replace the seal, most times I just keep reusing the seal, unless they're really bad. If they have a little spring that goes around on the inside of that rubber, and if that gets ripped out of there somehow or whatever, then you for sure have to replace the seal. But in this case, I'm just going to set that there, and then we're just going to kind of tap that into place. And I'll just have a big rubber mallet here, and I'm just going to kind of go around there. And this side is pretty easy because it's got that nice lip on it. And there we go. So the bearing is all in here nice and flush, and the bearing's in here where it's supposed to be, and then the seal is nice and flush all the way around there. So that is all done, ready to go. We're going to do the same to the front bearing. We'll get it packed, and then I'll show you how you actually put this hub back on. So I have cleaned the spindle off. That's this little guy right here. And I've got the hub assembly sitting right here in front of me. It's a little heavy, so I'm going to kind of grunt a little bit, but I got to get this in. I'm going to slide that all the way on, and then I want to keep the pressure of the front. I want to hold that up and grab the bearing and slide the bearing in. And then I'll put that washer and then the nut on there, and then tighten that up. And so we'll go to that point, and then I'll tell you how you actually adjust it to make sure it's on there correctly. So anyway, what I've done is I've filled the center of the hub up with grease, and the bearing's greased. So we're good that way, and we've got that seal on. So here we go. So that's in there. We're going to grab our bearing, which we have all greased up. We're going to slide that in there. Where it goes. We got our flat washer. We'll put that on. And then we have our nut. And we'll tighten that on there. All right, so that is the heavy stuff done. All right, so I'm going to wipe off that grease. Now this nut is a 1 1/16. Most of the tools I have these days are all metric, but this was American made, so everything on it is all done on the American system. So anyway, what I want to do is I'm going to use my torque wrench, and I'm going to torque this between 17 and 25 foot-pounds while I rotate this. That's going to squeeze those bearings up there, squeeze any grease out that's got to be greased, pulled out and everything. And then once I'm at that torque, I'm going to back it off by half a turn, and then I'm going to retorque it between 10 and 15 foot-pounds. And once I'm at that torque, that'll be done. At that point, I'll put this little locking ring on with a cotter pin in it. So normally, if in this case, the book says what to do, so that's nice. But a lot of times, like on my tag axle and stuff, I just tighten it down to where it's it's tight to turn it, and then I back it off just a little bit, and when it starts to feel spin free, then that's where I lock it in at. So I do those a little differently. When I do trailer axles, I do that the same way. Because this is my front end and everything, I'm just going to follow the manual to be a little closer to be more like on spec. So I'm going to put that on there, and then as I turn that to tighten, I'm going to rotate this hub around. So hear that little click? So that means that I'm at that particular setting. And now I got to grab my breaker bar. I don't like to back my torque wrench back, go backwards. So I just kind of keep it the one way. But all right, so I'm coming back. All right, and now according to the book, I'm going to change my torque wrench to 10 to 15. I'm actually at 23 right now. So that's 20. There's 15. So let's do about 14. And we're now going to so that spins pretty good. So I'm snugging that up a little bit. Now the reason I don't put my torque wrench at the max is because I have a tendency when it actually clicks, I sometimes move it just a little bit more. So I'd rather have it be in the setting than to be over torqued, okay? And sometimes that don't seem like a lot, but you know, it is what it is, and that's just how I do it. You can do however you want, but now my hub spins freely. It's all greased and everything. That's good. We've got to put our little lock piece in here, and there's actually a hole there. I didn't show you, but there's a hole going through there that the cotter pin goes through. And what I'm doing is I'm trying to get the nut on this and have one of these holes here line up with the cotter pin that's going to go in there. So that looks pretty good. Not very difficult to do. And then we're going to put a brand new cotter pin in there. So let me grab that and then we'll put it in. So you can see I've got the cotter pin in there. I can spin my hub here just fine. And the next thing is to put the dust cover in there. So this is the dust cover, and it's just going to go over. Just kind of goes in place. Remember, we pulled that off with some pliers, so it's not that hard to get on there. And then I'm going to take my rubber mallet here, and I'm just going to kind of pound that all in there so that it is completely snug. Now, I once had a car that the dust cover came off. Let me tell you, the wheel didn't last long without it. So you want to make sure and get this back on there. Otherwise, the dirt gets into that bearing and really makes a mess of things. So anyway, that's done. Our next step is to go ahead and put our caliper back on. And we also got to clean our rotor. So the rotor does come with kind of a greasy stuff on it to keep it so it doesn't rust. So we've got to use our brake cleaner spray to wipe that down really good and get all the junk off there. But we don't want to do that until we get it on here, because I'm picking it up with my greasy hands and everything. So there's no reason to do it twice. So we're going to go ahead and clean that off, and then we'll put the rotor on. Alright, so we are ready to put the caliper back on, but before we can do that, we've got to compress these cups. Alright, so normally they're pretty flat to there, and our brake pads are worn down by probably about 1/8 on each side, so they're sticking out here a little ways. So when we put the new pads on there, it'll make it too skinny to get over our rotor. So that's why we've got to compress that down. So what we're going to do is we're using a C-clamp and the old brake pad, and we're going to put that between there. Let me see if I can tip this out just a little bit. We're going to put that between the old brake pad and the base here, and we'll just kind of do this C-clamp up until those are nice and snug against the back. Now you want to inspect those when you're going to do them. Make sure they're not all broke, or the rubber that's around here is all cracked and everything, or leaking. So if they're leaking or cracked stuff, then you just need to replace your calipers with some new ones. But we're just going to slowly do this C-clamp up like this, and we're squeezing. What we're doing is we're squeezing the brake fluid from the caliper back through the system into our reservoir. Now, some people don't like to do that because they say there's dirt in here, it's going to be pushed back in the line. Now, that's true. So sometimes I'll just open up the bleeder valve and do it that way too. So just two different ways of doing it. I always learn this way. I've never had any issues, so I haven't worried about it. But that's up to you. If you do use the bleeder valve to do it, then make sure you have enough brake fluid in your brake reservoir to fill your caliper back up again. Same way if you remove the caliper. Alright, so that's nice and tight. I'm going to undo it and pull that brake pad out of there. And our caliper is all nice and flat here. So you can see that all the little rubber things are all intact, and it's all nice and smooth around here. So it's ready for our pads to go back in again. Before I go too far, let's talk about those pins that we pulled out. Here is the groove that those pins went in. And I've cleaned up the pin so that you can see it a little bit better here. And if you look at the pin, it's actually got the little burr on one side, and there is no burr on the other side. And so what happens is that this slides through here, and that's what holds it in there. And the key to putting this back in is you want this mark, that little burr, to hit against the top side of this. So one side, it will, when it goes in, it'll hit and stop. So if you look at it the way it is right now, the burr's on this side. So if that's going to hit the thing and stop, that's great. But if you keep pounding on it and it just keeps going and just goes all the way back through, then you actually put this pin in upside down. So then you would turn it the other way. That way when it slides along, it will stop and lock in place. So that's how they work. We have to clean this. I cleaned all these grooves out, and now we're getting ready to put this on. And so we want to actually utilize some brake grease, some lubrication here. We're actually going to put it on these sides. So this caliper actually slides back and forth as it's squeezing the rotor. And so we want to put some lubrication there. We want to put some lubrication on the actual frame piece that it's going to mount to, and also on the back of the pad. So if you look on the front of this, it shows you all the place that you should put some. So just smear a bunch on all these different places and then you'll be fine. So I'm going to do that, and then we're going to get ready to actually slide the rotor into place. I don't know if I can show you this part right here, but let's see, is my finger showing up here? Alright, so in the back of this rotor here is where this particular brake pad goes. It actually sits in there like that. But there's a little spring that goes in on the top here to hold it in. And so you got to get that all in there, and that actually squeezes in here, and you're going to push this all the way up against the rotor. So you want to make sure that when you're putting grease on these different spots, you didn't get some on the rotor. If you did, then just wipe it off. Not a big deal. And then go ahead and slide this in. So I'm going to do that. I'll get it into place, and then this brake pad will be against there. You have to have this one in because the caliper actually slides, those cups slide over this back side. So I've put grease on the cups and I've done this, and then we'll slide it in. Alright, so there's a little spring right here. I'm just pushing down on it, and it's sitting on, boy, it's really hard to get this angled in here, but it's sitting on the brake pad there, and I'm just going to push down on it while I'm pushing this pad into place. So now, if you look at that, it's right there. The pad's in the bottom. I'm actually going to push this all the way up against that rotor. So it is in there where it goes. So that's the back side. So this is the front pad, okay, and it's got a little catch right here, all right, and it's going to go over this section of the caliper. So I've put grease on all those insides where this is going to touch here and on the back here. And all this does is, there's two things you got to keep in mind. This has got to go over so the caliper itself slides in there, and then these little marker things go into the end of this on both sides of that. And as soon as they all snap into place, you've got that actually in the right place. So we're going to do that. And I think we've got it all in the right place. So that's all there, nice and snug where it goes. Now we're ready to slide this caliper into place. Alright, so hopefully you'll be able to see this as I take this. My cups right here are just going against this back of this other brake pad that's in there. This is the brake pad here that's going to slide in here, and I just kind of slide that up there and slide this into place. Just that easy. Alright, so now we're ready to put our pins in. So this part right here is flat, so that's going to just go in there, and that way the little catchers that ping will be hitting right on this edge right here. Alright, remember I'm putting the pin to the outside and I'm putting it in there, and I'm going to actually angle it down just a little bit, and using a ball peen hammer I'm actually just going to go in there so that squeezes it in there. So I got the first one started. I'm going to do the same thing on the top. That helps align the caliper where it's going to go, and then I'm just going to slowly just tap in both sides here, top and bottom, and until they are in place. And then you'll hear it actually ping when it hits the back there. So let me see if I can do something to get that in there better. So hear that solid sound. Hopefully you can tell the difference there, but you can see there that that bottom edge is hitting the bottom frame, and that's what's making that solid sound. So that one's done, in place. We're going to do the top one and the brakes will be done. We're ready to put the wheels on. Okay, so our caliper's all on. Now I actually, once the pen pinged over there, I actually knocked it back just a little bit, kind of the center a little bit. But the other thing I want to do now is I want to spin this. You can hear it's natural for the brake to drag a little bit, so that's not a big deal. I just want to make sure this turns and that I didn't mess up something or bind something. And the other note I should tell you about is because we compress that caliper, when we push on the brake for the first time, it's going to push all that fluid back into there and tighten those brakes up against the rotor. And so the first time you do that, your brake pedal is probably going to go to the floor, and it might take 1 or 2 pumps before your brakes solid up and they're good again. So that's normal. It's not a big deal to worry about. So after that, they'll just work normal. So anyway, we are done with that part of it, and we are ready to install the wheel on here. So we're going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and put the other wheel in here, and to do this, I'm going to kind of tip it in here a little bit. And then I'll line it up, and I'm using a tire iron here to actually lift it up into place. So I'm going to just get the hub to slide around just a little bit, and then we just slide those on. So now that I've got that on, I like to take some WD-40, and I actually like to spray a little bit on each one of these bolts here. I like to take the lug nuts and spray just a little bit inside as I'm putting them on. That just keeps them lubricated a little bit so that they don't rust up and get stuck on there so tight. You want them tight. They're going to be torqued down at 150 pounds, but I don't want them to be rusty. So I've got that on there, and those are all tight. Now it's time to let the jacks down, and then we'll go ahead and do the final torquing them on and getting the hubcap back on again. Okay, wow, those are now torqued at 150 foot-pounds, and we are ready to put the hubcap on. One thing that I should mention about when you're torquing these, I'm doing a crisscross pattern, all right? And then when I'm done, I start at one spot and I double check the torque and I count. I know there's 10 of these. I just go all the way around counting until I hit 10. That way I for sure haven't missed any. And then now I'm going to put on the little pieces that go with the hubcap, and I know that they go across from each other from the valve stem here. So I'm just putting a little WD-40 on here. I'm going to put these on where they go. Now that's my system. I don't know about yours, but and then these get torqued on here at 40. So there's 40, and then once I do it and that's torqued, I'm going to do it one more time just to make sure. All right, good. Now I'm ready to put the hubcap on. Now, this particular hubcap, if you look at it, it's got these little round spots on it. And down here, it's got a cutout, and so that's the side that the valve stem is on. So I'm going to just put that in there like that. lined up. Go all on there nice and tight like that. And then again, I'm going to put a little WD-40. These things are actually getting pretty rusty. So all I'm doing is just trying to keep them from actually rusting on there. I have one that's pretty tough to get off right now. So I mean, they're 25 years old sitting out in the weather, so they're really doing pretty good actually. Alright, these are also torqued on here at 40. So I'm just going to kind of do a few turns on each one as it works the hubcap on, and it gets nice and tight against the wheel. Okay, here, there's the click. Alright, and then finally the dummy caps. And then the bottom one slides on there. So I've got this one that's kind of slippery on there, so if I can get this up close enough, you might be able to see that there's little dents here. And so I'm going to take a punch and punch on those, and so I'm going to use a box end wrench that's about that size. So I'm going to set that over there like that, and just going to hold this here and put this on there. And the easiest way to do this is I put my foot up here, put that on there, and then use this punch. And all I'm going to do is I'm going to make those spots just a little deeper so that they catch a little bit better. There's 3 of them on mine. Yours, you just have to look at what you have. It may be that over time they've changed the way they do this, I don't know, but this works pretty good. And then if we slide this up, now it's pretty tight on there. Now I can't pull it off. So I fixed that just that easy. Well, this completes this maintenance adventure. This is something that is that you should be doing on your rig from time to time. So you need to make sure you check your manual and see what your maintenance schedule should be, and then kind of keep that maintenance schedule up. It's a lot simpler to do maintenance, a lot cheaper to do the maintenance than it is to wait until you have a major breakdown, which can get pretty costly. Now, if you don't feel like you could do this on your own, that's okay. I was talking to somebody and they said, you know, you don't have to always take it to a dealer and leave it there for weeks. They do have mobile mechanics you can call, and they are rated, and so you can find a good mobile mechanic and they'll come out and they'll take care of it right on site, just like you're doing it. And so if you don't feel comfortable doing some of these steps, then you could always pursue getting a mobile mechanic. Today we've replaced our repacked all our bearings, we replaced the rotors, and we put on new brake pads. So we're done. So hopefully you find this of value. Remember, make comments below. If you have questions about anything, I am more than happy to answer those questions for you, help out any way that we possibly can. And you know, also remember, give us a thumbs up if you can, and we'll continue to make these videos and see if we can help out different people. But for now, our adventure is finished, and so we're just going to plan on hopefully seeing you down the road somewhere.